Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in, to all of you out in the audience. Thank you for joining us today on our third session of Screens Unscripted. This series of fireside chats is meant as an opportunity to explore innovations and trends in digital signage and display technology with industry subject matter experts. And we have an outstanding guest with us today. Just real quick introduction. My name, for those of you I have not met yet, is Jonathan Braun. I'm a principal at Braun Consulting. I'm a director of the Digital Signage Experts Group, and I am a board of directors member for the Digital Signage Federation. Before we get started, I have to give a very big thank you to our sponsors at Sony. They're part of the advisory council for the Digital Signage Federation. We're kind enough to help us put on this series of programs for you all, so greatly appreciate it. Today we have a very special guest, as I mentioned, but just real quick before I ask him to introduce himself, I want to give everyone just a bit of housekeeping so that we can make sure you all know how to communicate with us. Everyone is on mute. I think you all noticed that when you joined, but please use the chat or Q&A boxes. They're going to be on the right-hand side of your screen, and unless you move them, then at that point you're on your own. I can't help you, but definitely go ahead and use that. You can communicate with us, and I'll be more than happy to field Q&A as we go. We will have some dedicated Q&A time at the end of our discussion, so we'll take care of that for you. We are recording this, so a recording will automatically get sent out to everyone, and Sony is going to be kind enough to host this on their YouTube channel. So if you have any colleagues that were not able to attend, please feel free to share either the direct GoToWebinar recording or, of course, the YouTube link. You'll get email notification for that. And this is the third of a series of discussions with industry luminaries, and we really appreciate, I see some familiar names in the registration list, those of you who've come to multiples, but if you are planning on attending, stay tuned for more sessions. And also, if you have any topic ideas or suggestions from people you'd like to hear from, let us know. We are always looking to grow and improve this program for all of you, our audience that makes this possible. Okay. Enough from me. As I said, we do have a very special guest today with us from Userful. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with him around data metrics and how that's redefining digital signage. So first of all, Kashif, thank you for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and maybe tell them a little bit about your role at Userful and what Userful does.
For sure. So thank you for the opportunity, Jonathan and Sony. Excited to share my thoughts on the topic. My name is Kashif Altaf, as Jonathan said. I have been with Userful for around 10 plus years, I'll say. Before that, I have consultancy and software development background. But I have been part of this industry in one shape or another. With Userful, Userful used to be a video wall centric company, so that will take sources and put it on the displays or group of displays, right? But in the last few years, significant changes has happened in the Userful, and we have launched Userful Infinity platform a year and a half ago. That platform actually allows our users to figure out the operational signage, control room solutions, and data metrics as well. So the core idea is still same, where we are ingesting the sources and routing it to the appropriate destination. But underneath platform is really strong, where we are utilizing the standard IT infrastructure, and on top of that, we are providing the power to route the information throughout the campuses for our audience.
Excellent. Yeah, that was going to be one of the questions that I wanted to make sure I asked, since you were kind enough to join us. Was I was familiar with Userful, but I'm willing to bet I'm not the only person who immediately said, oh yeah, the video wall folks, because that's how I was originally introduced to your organization many years ago. And it's great to hear how that's evolving, because the technology that you were using for simple, I know I'm oversimplifying, don't yell at me for that one, but simple video walls really kind of starts to transition over to digital signage and some of the other uses, because data is data and video is video, right?
Yeah. So I mean, let me touch on that a little bit. So for example, when we are talking about video walls, we are taking pixels and putting it on the displays, and then we have a hard problem to solve, which is synchronization over the network, right? And I believe that we have mastered that like 6, 7, 8 years ago, and then we know that domain. But what has evolved over the years, first of all, the incoming sources have become complex. That's one. Secondly, the overall landscape has changed. So it's not just the closed area network or the local LAN. It's more like a WAN or metropolitan LAN where people want to manage multiple, locations or campuses many times in different cities or different geos, right? So how do we solve this problem? How do we go beyond our local area network, but still have that centralized distribution in our control? That's where the powerful management layer comes into the picture, where we say that, okay, we are going to ingest a source, for example, an RTSP camera feed from a campus A, but the headquarters is in a different geo where the team is sitting to analyze that RTSP feed to make certain decisions. So how do we route that over the wide area network? So then we ask ourselves, what are the important metrics that you want to achieve? Is the real timeness of that feed, is that important? Or if the answer is no, it's not important, then we flip our protocol, and then we go to HLS, and then we say, okay, there will be some delay, but it's more efficient over the wide area network, so let's go that route and then process that. So all these things are newer as compared to what Userful was like 7-8 years ago, right?
Sure, yeah, and that's really great to see, because I think you're right. We all talk about like AV over IP as an industry, and that's been something that's been discussed. And I love it when I'll have a customer ask me, oh, I want a display that can accept AV over IP, and I go, what does that mean? What standards are we talking about? What protocols do you have? What's your goal? Because it's not just a generic black box, right? And so that whole idea of people kind of oversimplify the technology. And I don't envy you and your development team to build out the ways to synchronize things like that, because that's got to be an impressive challenge. Because the little bit I know about networks, I'm a diehard AV guy. I've been doing it a while, but I know displays better than I know networks. I don't know if it can be dangerous. What I do know about networks, that whole thing kind of scares the heck out of me. So I get you on that. That's got to be an interesting challenge in terms of optimizing code and things like that. But I like how you brought up data metrics, because obviously that was part of what we wanted to make sure we discussed. That was in the title for our talk today. And that's kind of something I want to dive a little bit more into, because as Userful has evolved, I think also overall digital signage has evolved, and how we use these screens has evolved. And I wanted to get your thoughts on how things are starting to change, and what kinds of information are we now starting to work with? Like you mentioned, RTSP camera feeds. And some of us might say that it's more of a traditional, like a command and control or video wall, or maybe an emergency services type application, but you're ingesting data and you're using it in a different way. And that's kind of how digital signage works, right?
Right. So how data metrics has evolved, that's a very, very interesting topic, because it goes beyond traditional signage, I would say, or traditional AV signage, right? Because the incoming that we are seeing in our BI dashboards, as an example, it's very complex data, and over time, organizations are collecting more and more data. So the first challenge is that where do we keep that data? And then the next is that how do we analyze that data? So for example, one of our customers, large distributed organization, they keep their data in the Snowflake cloud, and at the same time they have their data in the SQL servers as well, legacy data, right? So the challenge is that they want to query both, and then they want to pull certain reports to make informed decisions. So that's where some consultancy comes into play, that, okay, figure out your data lake and data input, and then the BI tool, like a Power BI or a Tableau or some other tools as well, how they are going to sit on top of that and make the connections with that data, either through direct query or import mode or so on and so forth, right? And then display that data at the right place at the right time. So that's where I think I would say some challenges on the amount of data, and then data silos as well. That what I observed, that many times when we are working with organizations, their data is compartmentalized by departments or by certain groups, right? But when they are trying to pull data to make certain decisions, right? So the aggregation is a challenge as well, right? So then what we need to do is that maybe pull a report from site A, pull a report from site B. Data sources are different. The BI tools are different, but they want to see it on one pane of glass as an example, right? So that they can have informed discussions in their meeting room, huddle rooms, or even war room situations as well. So that's the kind of like challenge and the evolution as well. So it's the amount of data, and but at the same time complexity of data as well, because at the end of the day humans want to parse, and I want to know the relevant information at the right time so that I can make decisions based on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're highlighting some of the really important things. And I find it funny, and I was talking with my friends at Sony about this recently, that we've got these same kinds of trends that keep coming up in every discussion I've had as part of this series, where we've had discussions on AI. Well, we came around to, okay, so how does AI influence digital signage and how is it changing things? And it got to some of the very same topics you're bringing up, which is we've got all of this different type of data, and a digital signage CMS is not just a CMS anymore. It's not just delivering broadcast content from one point to many endpoints. It's now becoming more of, we've got all these different data sources, and you're right, we need to find ways to help people parse that, get their relevance that they need, and understand it through a single interface. But yet we're pulling in all these different data sources from everywhere, and we've got to kind of, I don't know, I guess really aggregate that into a meaningful fashion. And then that's driving changes in use for signage of all types. So we really kind of come a long way from retail. And so I think you'd probably agree that digital signage is evolving and it's becoming more, and I really wanted to ask this one just because you're kind of approaching it from the other side, where you weren't really originally a digital signage CMS, even though you can do signage. And so we're seeing CMS companies kind of adapt from the other way, that they were CMSs. Now they're trying to figure out more of what you do with data aggregation, right? So this is kind of the natural evolution for signage, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I would agree with you that aggregation is one problem, but on top of that, the next problem is distribution, right? So with the aggregation, I think what we are seeing because we were doing the distribution before, right? But now we want to aggregate as well, but with the right platforms. So for example, we have Power BI integration, we have Tableau, we have ServiceNow, and so on and so forth, right? But what do we do with all that? So once we pull in that data, then we actually composite it, either on a large format display LED, or in a group of displays, and then broadcasting it after that, once we make that composite as well. So that becomes another very interesting challenge to work with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly bet it is, because you're having so many different data sources, and some of them very disparate, that you're having to try and kind of integrate into one overall platform. So I guess that begs a really important question then. So we've got all these different sources, and we've got all these different types of data. And I definitely think that we both agree that data and metrics have become a driving force in a lot of this type of product and software development. So what key metrics, if you were going to advise someone looking at deploying this kind of a solution to improve, whether it's public sector, whether it's private, corporate communication, what key metrics do you see your customers really using and focusing on? So maybe we can share some insight there with our audience.
Yeah, for sure. So metrics are going to vary by the, I would say, type of solution or the industry that we are going after. As an example, healthcare, they are very much focused on security and compliance for the right reasons, right?
Sure.
So that is going to be the number one thing for them. So they're going to look at things like, when data at rest, how you are handling it, what type of encryption you have. When we're transmitting the data, what type of encryption you have, what type of compliance is in place, so that my data is safeguarded. Although I am a true believer that the customer is in charge of data. I think as solution providers, our job is to make sure that first of all, we are putting the safeguards around that. So like I said, that data, the encryption at rest and while transmitting the data. But at the same time, there is an education component to that as well. So informing customers that when they are making the decisions, it should be very much consensual. And if we need to ask them multiple times, let's do that, so that they are making informed decisions that why they are doing it. So security and I would say compliance is one angle when I'm talking about healthcare. But let's say if I pivot to the, for example, in a control room environment where transportation, as an example, airports, right, where they can they are monitoring incoming and outgoing traffic, or the density of the of people, or if there is a certain incident that they need to handle. That's where the real timeness of the data becomes more and more important, right? High
Right.
availability becomes more important. So like 4 nines or 5 nines metric that come in place as well. Real timeness, how many millisecond delay I am getting from my where you are pulling the data, either it's a report for data metric, or is it a traditional camera feed, as an example, right? What type of delays I'm dealing with, so that I know how much behind I am on that information, right? So these types of things I think come in play, but as I said, that it varies sector by sector.
Sure, I bet. And I would think it's going to vary pretty wildly because you hit some really great examples, like healthcare is obviously a different caliber of data and how they handle it than transportation. Corporate communication is probably one of the simpler ones, at least in an initial thought. I think retail is probably the simplest, but just because you're not necessarily integrating with as many different types of data, where you're really looking at pricing and stocking and traffic views versus all the stuff like an emergency services needs. Would you also say it's probably fair that this kind of reliance on data is also driving a lot of things like IoT sensors and triggers to be part of more systems, and even starting to get integrated in things like display products now, to where we're trying to capture a lot more data and use it, not just sourcing it from like a Power BI, right?
Yeah, for sure, you hit a very good point. So, in my experience, like 10 years ago, retail used to be very simple, but because of all these IoT sensors, now a lot of data is incoming from the environments as well, right? For example, what type of traffic I'm seeing there? Like, do I need to change my signage based on the traffic so that I am putting up the right products? At the same time, do I need to be connected with my inventory so that I know that, okay, which items should go on sale, or where I should go, give them more promotions. So retail signage is also evolving very fast with this interconnect, where IoT sensors are bringing in a lot of data, and that is informing the decision makers, either human or systems, right? Both. There is a big, I would say, buzzword going around nowadays that can also play a big factor here. So that decision making and the information, when it goes to the end customer, actually they get something out of it, because they know that, okay, this is going to be a win-win situation for the provider and for the consumer as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Gee, I wonder what buzzword that might be. We had a whole session on that. And I work this into every presentation I do now, which is I'm just going to put it on the first slide and say AI, there, I got it out of the way. Let's move on. Uh, so, so I'm with you on that. But no, I think that's really important because you're seeing more and more, like I start seeing now displays with like air quality sensors in them.
Yes.
And with how advanced machine vision has gotten now, when we deploy cameras, and this is kind of one of those, it's a little big brother that some people get uncomfortable. When we do deploy cameras alongside signage systems, having metrics for, like you mentioned, traffic flow, where if I'm a retail environment, I want to know where my customers are moving in the space to
Right.
optimize one, physical placement for my screens, but also if we look at traffic patterns, humans are pretty predictable creatures. We can kind of figure out what we're going to do based on what we have done. And so seeing how people move through, what products they interact with, I can now optimize my content to make sure I'm hitting someone at the right point to influence their decisions. Or if we go to, something like a more command and control type example, so that I can help make sure that my operators are getting data when they need it, and then I'm prioritizing the right feeds for them, right? So we're making sure that we hit those important points because it's all about relevance. And I think that was such an important point that you made earlier. It's about relevance and helping our users parse and consume that data. You did mention a couple of tools, like you mentioned Power BI, you mentioned Tableau. Are there other common tools that you see that you're having to integrate with, or that you see people using, or more importantly, not using, that they probably should be paying attention to?
Yeah, there are some tools for, and again, sector by sector, right? So for example, healthcare, the Epic, I hear Epic's name all over the place, right?
Oh
But it is very,
yeah,
very, I would say, custom. Integration, because it's again compliance and privacy. But having Epic ability to display Epic dashboards. Example is, for example, a patient wait time is one example, right? So that is a very useful metric that the patrons of a hospital or a staff both can get use out of it. Another thing that we have seen working with a large health organization is that flow of the patients. So for example, if there's a dense area, or if there is an incident, if a certain facility is going to be crowded, and if they have adjacent facility, for example, I don't know, 10-20 kilometers away, so they can figure out what's the density of the patients coming in, and then before they reach to that facility, route it to the other location. So this is the interconnect that solutions can provide, where it's not just the digital signage at the campus, but also it's looking a little bit beyond that. We are seeing that influx of users or patients. How do we optimize our space utilization? And
sure.
during pandemic, we have seen that there was a huge need for the supplies as well, right? So there is an inventory component as well. And the solutions like Epic, they can all do that. But again, the challenge becomes that how do we put it at the right place, right time? So that's where we need to go extra mile and make sure that, okay, we're providing solutions for that type of thing as well. And then another one that keeps coming up is the service now. So for example, if there is a call center environment, or if there is an IT solution provider, and they have certain metric that they need to track, so ServiceNow type tools are very good tracking those types of things, and then having I would say availability and integration with those tools are going to be helpful for all stakeholders.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that would only be amplified in, like, you see things like from public sector standpoint, like emergency services, where you're seeing more fusion centers and other things being built, rather than having separate command and control environments, so that all of the first responders can coordinate. And that becomes, I think, even more important in that type of environment, right? Where you're having to have everything be timely, shared correctly, routed correctly, and that's got to be a pretty challenging environment to work in, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But with the right solution, I think it becomes easier, and especially when you do it over and over again. Then you have kind of like I would say, template available that you can guide your customers and IT teams that, okay, this is how you implement it. This is how we are seeing other places are using it. So example would be that, for example, for emergency services, a control room, right? And then don't just stop at the control room, also have a war room. So for example, adjacent to that control room, so that if there's a situation, you can pull people together in that war room, and then have the dialogue either in person or remote, both, right? And then make decisions based on that, using the mass notification alert, or so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I mean, really what you're describing is a hybridization of a lot of different types of technology here, right? So traditional digital signage, command and control type, I'm gonna say content management. I know that's not exactly, I don't want to just call it a video wall, because it's more than
Right.
that, but that type. There's the data integrations, there's collaboration and conferencing components. So this really is a kind of a bigger solution than what I think a lot of people might consider, right?
Exactly, and there is a notification component as well. So action. So what everything that's happening in the facility, if there are other people that they need to be aware of it, about it, or they are impacted by it, they need to know about that. So it's that workflow that I think we need to think about, that how we are going to help our users, that they can achieve their workflow, and hopefully their day-to-day job is easier as well.
Excellent, excellent. And one of the other topics that keeps seeming to come up whenever we're having this discussion about the evolution of this type of technology, even though we've been talking about broader topics than just digital signage, but it's that this is becoming more of a, when we look at signage, it's becoming more of a two-way communication. And data definitely figures into that because we're having to source and collect that data somehow. So one of the questions I definitely wanted to ask was, so what is your opinion about how we can improve our systems to make them more of that two-way communication? Well, one, is that even important in your opinion? But then how would we do that? How would we go about changing our strategy to optimize for that? How can we optimize our solutions to make sure we deliver that type of communication?
It's a very good question, and I 100% agree that it needs to be two-way communication wherever it makes sense. So example would be that on a factory floor. So let's say auto manufacturing is happening, and there are certain checklists that people need to checklist item that people need to perform on a certain station, right? So it is not one-way signage there, right? So yes, one-way signage is there to guide that these are the steps, or this is what you need to do at that station, but the confirmation that is it actually done. So for that reason, I think a tablet or some sort of interactive screen comes in play. It could be your cell phone or your tablet or interactive display where you actually confirm that yes, I have performed these 5 tasks, and now the operation can move to the next station. That's one example, and there are others as well where I have seen that like the corporate signage is an example where HR is pushing messages, right? The having a right camera in place, it is going to put you in a frame and make it more fun, so that it's going to capture your picture with some kind of background in that, right? So those types of like fun activities as well. So that's where we see user engagement more and more when we are providing that platform that yes, you can actually interact with the content as well. It's not just one way, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's I like seeing when people get creative, because it's really kind of challenging to do that kind of communication. Because again, a lot of folks are approaching digital signage from the standpoint of that old school thinking of I'm taking and I'm broadcasting ads. And it's very much like we had one of our guests bring up the point. It's like broadcast TV. Nobody watches live TV anymore.
Right.
I don't even have live TV. It's all various streaming apps, or you have some form of DVR or something. Nobody deals with that way. It's all on demand as you want it. And so that even has changed, and it's
Yeah.
more of a two-way communication. So one of the things that I wanted to explore is, so we've obviously talked a lot about the different uses for kind of data, some of the different types of data we can capture and how that can vary by vertical. But I want to explore a little bit of where you see this going and continuing to evolve. So what new uses do you think we'll come up with for this type of technology? Will tools like AI, there, I'm actually legitimately bringing it up now, not making a bad joke. Sorry for that one earlier. But what kind of tools do we see evolving? How is that going to impact it? Because this, to me, seems like, you mentioned rapidly evolving. Yes, 100%. But it seems like we're heading in this direction quicker and quicker and quicker, and things are continuing to change very rapidly. So if you had a crystal ball to kind of predict where things going, where do you see this continuing to evolve into?
Yeah, so great question. I think the one thing is that the amount of data is going to grow over time. It is already growing, but it's going to grow even further. And then dealing with that, I would say data pool. And when I say data, it's not just for reports. It's for IoT sensors. It's for other things as well, right? So that is going to grow. So that is first thing that I think people need to pay attention to, that how we're going to deal with that. And then analyzing that data, that's where I think AI can really help, and it's getting good there. I have seen that there are certain privacy concerns as well with that. So people don't want to, sensitive corporations actually, they don't want to put their data into the public services and then route through that. So I think as solution providers, it's our job to make sure that we're giving them option, that if they want to have local models and then they want to keep their training data with them, so there should be possibility for that as well. But conceptually, I think it's same thing, that where you have large amount of data that you want to analyze and then make good sense out of it. That's the big evolution. So I'm using big words in a very, very high level generic way, but actually these are harder problem to solve. When I say make sense of it, so if I have, let's say, a million record of certain type of data, and I'm asking that, okay, plot me a graph for last quarter as an example. What graph, what data is going to go where, what type of graph, how do I quantify that, what I'm putting on x-axis, y-axis, or is it going to be pie chart or other things, right? So I think AI is getting good at figuring that out based on our inputs. I think our input is very, very important there, right? And then also changing it. Let's say if I don't like that output, so that ability that, yes, I have understood the data, but now very fast, I can actually plot a different iteration of it, what I've done in the previous one, right? So that's where I think I see that things are going, in the future. So generative AI is going to be much more, I would say, creative, and then utilizing of that data is going with the generative AI is going to be very useful, which is actually the evolution of the digital signage.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I think that's why AI has become an overused buzzword and everybody's putting it on everything. And it's like, no, what this is really good at is sorting numbers, managing data, taking a look at huge data sets that at least I know I'm not capable of really wrapping my head around, and distilling that down and turning that into something that's actionable, where we're looking for patterns, or we're building something like you mentioned, I need to chart something. So I'm building that chart off of the data that we received, and I need the computer to help me figure those things out, because to have a person do it takes forever. And
Right.
so I think that's an important distinction. And especially for those people who are kind of getting overwhelmed with AI everything, it does have legitimate uses. It's not just a fun toy. So before we jump into Q&A with our audience, because I always try to leave about 15 minutes for direct Q&A with our audience, I do have one last request. If we're going to provide a couple of key takeaways on this topic that we've been discussing today for our audience, so that they've got some, if we 2 or 3 bullet points, these are the things we really want them to understand and go home with, what do you think they would be?
Yeah. So if I have to pick and choose, I would say that, first of all, figure out what problem you are trying to solve. So all solutions are not for all problems. And when I say that, what I mean is that, let's say if your corporate goal is to run lean manufacturing, you need to understand that what are your pain points, and then the question comes how. So what is very important in the solution design or even product development as well. So figure that part out, and then obviously find the right solution for your problem and then put it in place. And then secondly, I would say is that uh, we all hear for years now that data is the king, or data lakes, and then now AI is in the picture, and in that as well. It's Data is really, really powerful tool, right? So pay attention to the visualization. What I have seen, that sometimes people leave these types of problems to the business analyst, and they have their particular, I would say, silo, or the part of their job that they do. And then many times all these data and their translation and the reports, they just sit in the inboxes. So make some extra effort to make sure that it reaches to the right audience, either if it's a factory floor worker or an executive for decision making. So do that. So I think if we do these couple of things, then we are actually making an impact.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. All right, so to our audience, if you have any questions you'd like to ask either of us or both of us, please feel free to go ahead and throw those into the Q&A. Again, it was in the toolbar on the right-hand side. If you moved it, I don't know where you put it. We got a couple of great questions in here already, which is outstanding. So let's just kind of start with one. This is an interesting one because I'm kind of curious of your standpoint on it. So a little more hardware focused this time. The SoC advantage in many applications for flat panels is well known. Another SoC question. Okay, very good. But DVLED, there's not an SoC dynamic in the same way. What do you see as the main challenges in software-defined AV over IP solutions for direct view LED? Oh, I like that one. That's good.
Very, very good question. And we started asking these questions years ago when we were looking the low pixel pitch DV LEDs and all that. Obviously, always there is a controller with those LEDs, right? So what I have seen, some manufacturers, they have started utilizing, I would say, lightweight operating systems in those controllers. So that is one angle that we can put applications in those controllers, right? So that's one way of doing it. But my information could be a year or 2 year old. There were limitations there because those controllers are basically treated like an appliance. So they are closed solution, right? So what we can do is that go a little bit old school, where you can, when you are keeping your controller, make sure that you have some kind of player attached to it, which is going to become an input, right? Obviously, this is not SoC, but I think that's one option we have in the meantime. What I see over the years, that these systems, they will have the operating systems, and as I said, that I have seen little bit closed systems, but they are going to open up a little bit, and it will be similar to SoC. The physics and the dynamics of DV LEDs, obviously that does not allow to build the controller in so far, but the electronics have surprised us if we look at last 50 years. So who knows, this receiver and the sender cards are going to be in one housing. If they are, maybe they can add a controller there as well. So it's the component challenge, I think. Over time, if it is going to be smaller, hopefully it will be more manageable.
Yeah, and I think this is actually, and I'm gonna riff on that for a second, because I want to poke a little further, because this is I think an important question for a lot of people, because we're seeing more DV LED being installed not just for replacing LCD video walls, but even replacing single LCDs for signage, because size is impact, and keeping things larger or different shaped draws attention, right? So in kind of your opinion, and this is kind of a little bit of a userful question as well, but so we've got a DV LED solution, and let's say we're using one of the common processors like a Novastar, not sponsored, folks, but we're working with that. And so now we've got a media player attached to that. Historically, it's really been more of you're expecting the DV LED processor to have any of your windowing or other things, like maybe more of a traditional video wall processor, but a lot of, especially the lightweight ones, tend not to. So then is that really leaning on solutions like yours to really provide the windowing capability, or are you expecting some form of hardware there?
So if our solution is involved, then we treat the controller as just an, I would say, input, the HDMI input, right? So very similar to that. So our solution can actually fully handle the windowing and what content is going to play on that video wall. So for us, I think after the controller, it's just any display. It's just the large format display. Obviously, we need to have proper horsepower to drive those pixels. Let's say if we're going for 8K as an example, the compute in our server, or if it's coming from cloud, should be enough to drive the pixels on that wall, right?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So you really are taking and providing the full 100%. Capability with windowing and everything. So to you, it's just one single large screen, and it doesn't really matter. Okay.
Yes,
that makes sense. That makes sense. So I got another good one. Having data in data lakes is one thing. In AV in general, we still lack great dashboards where users can see quickly pertinent data around their application or deployment. These are questions, not novels, folks. What is Userful doing around that?
So what we do is that we rely on these tools that I mentioned before. We have great integration with things like Power BI as an example. So when I say great integration, what I mean by that is that we simplify the workflow. Like one time you need to authenticate using your create the passport. After that, based on your role-based access, you have access to all your workspaces. Under workspaces, all of your reports are there. And under reports, you can define what type of refresh rate you want to configure and all that. So that's simplifying the workflow. using the integration with Power BI. And tools like Power BI or others as well, they are great at visualizing the data from the data lakes, right? I'm oversimplifying it, but obviously there are layers in between where data is being, I would say, processed and be ready for visualization using these tools. So what solutions like ours do is that we provide the right integration with the right tools.
Excellent, excellent. So another interesting one came in. So you were speaking about two-way communication, and one way to accomplish that is with a touch interactive display. How can we potentially mine touch interactions, and can that data be used in a meaningful way?
Interesting. So one way of that I have seen or thought about is creating the heat maps from those touch interactions. What I mean by that is that, let's say if there is a screen or a tablet in front of that factory line worker, and the UX is not good enough, they keep pressing wrong buttons. But we can keep the record of, anonymously, obviously respecting privacy, we can keep record of that. Okay, user interaction is happening here, but then they are using the doing the error correction. So optimizing our UX of that, or it's taking them X number of seconds versus Y number of seconds. So optimizing that workflow using the A/B testing. So that's how I think we can utilize those interactions and then refine our processes based on that.
Okay, and would that be something where we're using it mostly for kind of UX, UI improvements, or might there be other potential usable data there that we can derive?
I think there could be others. I mean, and taking it a little bit differently, I can think of cameras, right? So different type of input, obviously vision, right?
Sure.
So we can figure out the density and correlate it with the time of the day, as an example, for a particular area, right? And we have seen that people have used during pandemic very creative ways, like that vision and how to divert the traffic, or how to make sure that we're in compliance with the guidelines, right? So that is another way of using it. Um, Probably there are others as well.
Fair, fair. So I have one more kind of an interesting question, and I think it's a good last one because I know we're going to come up on time, and I want to be very respectful of your schedule and our audience. But we touched on a little bit, but I got the question, what all is involved, in your opinion, in creating an overall strategy around using this type of data and metrics? So I'm going to interpret that a little bit more because we started to touch on it. Is if we were going to recommend, we've got one of our partners or one of our customers out in the audience, they're thinking about taking advantage of some of the great stuff like what Userful does, and they want to use this data, but they're not sure where to start. What would you advise them on how they can go about creating a strategy and moving forward?
So I'm going to go back on my previous answer where I said that figure out what problem you are trying to solve, right? That's number one always. And many times what happens is that when you start that discussion, that what problem you are trying to solve, it evolves, right? Because then you start thinking about, okay, that was the key problem, but there are other optimizations as well that I can achieve. Example is that one of our customers in the food manufacturing area, they just wanted digital signage in certain areas, right? They started with that, but when they look at the other possibilities, they started to integrate the camera streams using AI for the quality of their food. But that was not for going back on their factory floor, that was going into the quality assurance department. So they ended up putting up special displays for that, so that they can actually rectify that what are the things that are impacting the quality of the food. And there was I have seen very amazing use of AI in that. So actually from the camera they can actually figure out that the shape of the food item or the color of the food item, and there were indicators, pattern based indicators, that what's the quality of that particular item, right? These are very, very interesting use cases that come up once you start asking the question that what problem I'm trying to solve, right? That's one, starting the strategy. But I would say next step is to figure out the workflow, that who are my users and how they are going to utilize the touch points that I'm going to create for them. So map the entire journey in your mind, and then things will start coming together. The pieces will start coming together, that what software you need, what hardware you need, what infrastructure you need, what compliance you need, and what permissions you need, and all that, right?
Beautiful, beautiful. I absolutely agreed. Well, outstanding. I know we're at time. So first of all, I'd definitely like to thank you for joining me today, Kashif. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed the conversation. I learned a few things. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. Let's do the YouTube thing. And if somebody wants to learn more about Userful, where's the best place for them to go?
It's always userful.com. So just go there and you will find more information.
Perfect, perfect. Well, thank you again. I greatly appreciate your time today and sharing some of your busy schedule with us. To our audience, thank you all for attending. We'll hope we'll see you on a future episode of Screens Unscripted. And as always, thanks to our sponsor at Sony for helping us put this together and share this with our audience. Hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and thank you for attending.
Thank you.